program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Call this meeting of the Eau Claire Area School District School Board to order. Dana, are we in compliance with open meetings laws?
Yes.
Let's do a roll call.
Commissioner Lyons.
Here.
Commissioner Nordine.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Zur.
Here.
Commissioner Bika.
Here.
Commissioner Clements. Commissioner Clements. I can see he's in attendance but not able to unmute. I'll move on. Commissioner Harder.
Here.
Commissioner Clements. Commissioner Clements, are you here? Commissioner Clements, I can see that you are attempting to speak. I cannot hear you. Can anyone else hear him?
We can't hear, Dana.
Okay. All right. We have a quorum. Thank you.
All right, those who are willing and able, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we do at every meeting, we will begin with our public forum. Members of the public are given 4 minutes to address the board, and the school board will not hear personal complaints of school personnel or any person connected with the school system in a public forum. One thing that I realized last meeting I've been forgetting to do is ask our public forum participants to state their address for the record. So tonight we have one speaker signed up. It's Lucinda Kemet, and Ms. Kemet, if you could state your address before you begin.
Hello, my address is E4715 Queens Drive, Oliva, Wisconsin. Good evening, everyone. I wish I was there with you in person to see your smiling faces. I have two topics I want to cover tonight. The first is a quick rundown of the conversations regarding asynchronous versus synchronous learning. I had a chance to meet with Superintendent Johnson last week. Greatly appreciate that. I also got a phone call from a woman who's an administrator in one of our neighboring districts and a parent in this district. And she just brought back to me the importance of having the conversation about moving to synchronous learning. Synchronous learning being much more nimble and flexible so that whether we're in hybrid or virtual or we want to go back face to face, if we're synchronous with a set schedule, it's easier. Asynchronous learning in their district is being moved away from because kids were getting D's and F's, a lot like the issues we're having up at North right now. They found that way too much work for teachers to be in an asynchronous system. So I just highly encourage you to, it's going to be a difficult change because schedules have to change and teachers have been misplaced, but I highly encourage synchronous learning for second semester so that we are more nimble. Secondly, I've reviewed the changes that you're proposing for the Gifted and Talented program tonight, and I have concerns about both implementation and the implications of making such a large change. There are two justifications for this change as I understand them. The first is that making this change does not cause any harm to gifted and talented students, and that it reduces harm to other students. I would like to see the evidence for both of those statements. Second of all, I think there's a lot of questions that should be asked before making such a big change in our system. And I've just listed out all of the questions that I think should be considered before such a change is implemented. First of all, in the 2018-19 school year, we eliminated all pull-out groups for gifted and talented students. Did we see a difference in test scores for the kiddos in the top 5 to 10% who would have been impacted by that? Second of all, I encourage you to ask the teachers of the enriched classes and the traditional classes if they believe that there would be no harm caused by such a change and if it would be helpful to some. And then I also encourage you to ask the AP teachers of a variety of different subjects if they feel that this change would negatively impact their ability to cover the material needed for AP class and with the rigor needed for AP class. Many times our enriched classes are a way of preparing students for those AP courses, which are so critical for so many students. Next, I would encourage you to talk to students, current students, recent graduates. Ask them if having enriched classes was important to them, and just get a lot of feedback before making such a big change. And I would also make sure that we've covered off with college admissions professionals to understand if not having those courses would have an impact on their perception of our students. Finally, in summary, there's a couple of overriding things that I would encourage you to consider. First of all, teachers are expected to do more under this model. They're expected to be the ones to implement differentiation in the classroom, and there's I think booster groups they were called. I forget what they were called. Are the teachers willing to learn a new system, and do they have the ability to do that given everything else that's going on? With everything else that's going on, why are we doing such a change now? I know many students were completely shocked in August. High school students who had signed up for enriched classes didn't find out that enriched classes were not being offered this year until they got their schedules. And so that was a bit frustrating that there wasn't a feeling of transparency around making that decision. And then finally, in Wisconsin Statute 118.35 and some of the DPI standards that follow that, will we be able to still be in compliance with that, with the new policy that's being considered? Thank you all so much for all that you do, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. We now move on to our board reports. We'll start with the superintendent's report. Mr. Johnson.
Good evening, Chair Nordine, board members, and fellow executive team members. Tonight for my superintendent's report, I'd like to start this evening with some extremely positive news. I'm pleased to share that Memorial High School senior Benjamin Young has been selected for the College Board's National Indigenous Recognition Program. We've invited Benjamin to listen in this evening tonight. Benjamin, thank you very much for your willingness to share and allow us to celebrate your accomplishment. Benjamin earned this recognition through his academic achievements and outstanding performance on the PSAT and MSQT. This program will work with Benjamin to help connect him to colleges around the country and help showcase his talents and interests by sharing his achievements. Students recognized by the program may be considered for additional scholarships by colleges. Benjamin is the first district student to receive this prestigious recognition. Benjamin's also a National Merit Scholarship semifinalist, serves as vice president of the National Honor Society, helps tutor Native American students in math, regularly volunteers at the community table and Feed My People food bank, participates in boys tennis, cross country, chess club, Eco Warriors Club, and Math League. He's also a member of the Chippewa Valley Youth Symphony and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Benjamin is applying to MIT and Caltech to study astronomy, and while his outstanding accomplishments speak for themselves, I hope the additional recognition through the College Board National Indigenous Recognition Program helps Benjamin achieve his goals. Congratulations, Benjamin. That young man's busy, isn't he? And awfully talented. Next, I'd like to take some time to share the background and themes from my 100-day plan initiative as I illustrated during my spring interview process. The first slide provides background of this plan. Previously, I've shared with the board and specific interview groups about this process that former mentors and supervisors had guided me when I would start my superintendency. These mentors had shared that it assisted them in their transition, and since Eau Claire is a fairly large organization and community, it would be a very positive step toward learning about the organization, as well as affording me the opportunity to meet different stakeholders individually for up to an hour. I had begun this process on July 1st, and although I desired to interview 100 people as part of these 100 days, I did interview only 73. Had a pandemic not occurred, I think I could have interviewed more. I met with board members, administrators, teachers, staff, retirees, students, and community members. I chose these people due to their inclusion on the interview committee back in April, as well as key leaders in the district. While approximately 10 of these meetings were virtual, I was pleased to meet with the remaining 60 people one-on-one in my own office, outdoors, or in their office. I asked 5 questions of each individual after asking them brief biographical information. Number one, why do you do what you do? How can I count on you? What is working well district-wide? What is not working well, or have you serious concerns with district-wide? And what are two things you would like me to immediately do to support and lead? There were themes which emerged from each question, and I'd like to highlight them on the next slide. For the first question, why do you do what you do? I learned that from so many of our stakeholders that students are at the forefront, as well as making a difference or an impact for students. There was truly a theme that students are first, and amongst administrators, there was an addition of making a positive difference for students, teachers, and families. Secondly, the question, how can I count on you? Surprised some of my interviewees a little bit, but I appreciated the answers to their questions. The people I interviewed answered that they will support students, they'll put them first. Some of them mentioned being a champion or an advocate for students. There was a theme of knowledge of systems that can help me, as well as a history of the district and community, that they will be contributors when and if I ask. And then finally, they are relationship builders. Thirdly, in asking what's working well district-wide, I learned there were two themes here of strong community support in times of need or during referenda, and I often learned of caring and committed staff members. While these were somewhat expected, I was able to ask follow-up questions at this point where I was able to learn more about each individual's department or school or level or experience with the district, whether they were a community member, staff member, or other stakeholder. Fourth, in regard to my question, what is not working well or what concerns you, there were more themes, and like the past question, I was able to ask more follow-up questions about specific schools, departments, levels, or experiences. I learned quite a bit from the individuals I interviewed about organizational hierarchy, the inclusion of voices in decision-making structures, the overall culture of the organization, but more importantly, the immediate climate. Finances were also an issue in the upcoming referendum. Once again, many of these meetings have taken place in July and August, so a couple of these answers could have changed had I asked these questions now. Finally, another question that may have surprised people I met with was, what two things would you like me to do immediately to support and to lead? The themes including seeking input from multiple organizational levels, communicate appropriately, timely, yet with an order not to surprise leaders or staff in the organization, develop trust between all levels and stakeholders in the district, listen to concerns, and be very visible and supportive throughout the district. I truly enjoyed the time I spent with the stakeholders. While it was a tremendous time commitment, it enabled me to learn so much about the district and its people on a more personal level. This will allow me to impact specific trouble spots more quickly and provide evidence to the board, as well as support the positives. This will also help in my evaluation, the board's evaluation of me as well, and yet most importantly, to develop systems, structures, and engage in practices to improve our overall organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. We'll move on to the board president's report for tonight. There's only about two topics I feel like we talked about over this last week, and I want to hit both of them tonight. So over the last 2 weeks, we've seen COVID-19 rates increasing throughout the country, and alarmingly so here in the Eau Claire region. So we are in communication daily with the City County Health Department and among principals and other executive staff members about the situation in the district, considering our options. But as now, ECASD's commitment to maintaining social distancing and to masking continues to keep our students, staff, and community safe. While we do have staff and student cases of COVID, we have had no outbreaks in schools from COVID-19. All cases have been from the community, and any potential exposure that may have occurred in our schools has not resulted in others in school getting sick. We are proud of our staff and students for their commitment to safety. Because of these steps, ECASD is currently still in school in the blended model and able to provide continuity of education for students and families. This allows for more predictability and routine for those very same students and families and for our staff. We could not have done it without the work of that staff to provide our blended and virtual models. And since all of our teachers, or almost all of our teachers, are providing some level of virtual learning, should the situation in our district worsen and we need to move to 100% virtual instruction, our staff are in a far better position now to accommodate that shift, rather than having a significant portion of the staff with no virtual teaching experience in a fully face-to-face environment. So once again, we have our incredible staff to thank for putting Eau Claire students first and foremost across their learning, their safety, and their other needs. We know that this has been incredibly challenging. We know that teachers and families have worked hard to adjust, but right now we can see the benefits of that hard work in continuing to teach our students. Thank you. And finally, a reminder to everyone listening to vote in tomorrow's election. State and federal elections have profound impacts on public education, and making your voice heard is important in that process. If you have not already, we encourage you to vote tomorrow or to return absentee ballots to your polling place, as it is too late to mail them. Thank you. We now move on to our student representatives' reports. We'll start this week with our representative from Memorial, Emery Toole.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Dan.
Awesome. So tonight, Superintendent Johnson asked Zoe and I to share why we chose to be a board representative. Really, in the simplest terms, I believe in equity for all students, especially given the fact that we're facing a global health crisis. I felt that because my parents are in healthcare and my mom has experience as a professor in the online learning environment, I could be uniquely suited to advocate for student needs right now. Additionally, I have siblings in the middle level of school and lots of little cousins at the elementary schools, so I felt I could be able to advocate for younger students as well. Now more than ever, students need advocates as we face these tumultuous and unprecedented circumstances. In applying for and accepting this position, I hope to be a voice for students, and I am excited to continue listening and advocating through the rest of the 2021 school year. Mr. Johnson also asked us to share a little bit about our post-secondary plans and what we've learned so far. As far as post-secondary, I'm very happy to say that almost all of my college applications are submitted, and I plan to attend school for neuroscience with a minor in music next year. I think the most important thing that I've learned so far is that students are more than willing to share their needs if only given a place to do so, and that we should give them credit where it is due for their abilities to self-advocate and adapt to new and difficult situations.
Thank you. We'll now move to our representative from North High School, Zoe Wolf.
Tonight, I have a different report to give. Instead of talking about the student body, I'll be talking about myself. Mr. Johnson asked Emery and I to give some background information on why we wanted to join the school board and our plans for the future. Last winter, I came to a meeting with my dad when he had to present on behalf of the school resource officers with Kim Kohler. At first, the idea of coming to a meeting did not sound like something I would be interested in, but I figured I would tag along to hear my dad present. During the meeting, I saw the complexity behind everything that occurs in the district. It was quite fascinating. At the meeting, I learned that North didn't have a representative, which is what really pushed me to apply for the board. If it wasn't for attending that meeting, I wouldn't have thought twice about applying, but being in person to see all the factors in motion was intriguing. I ended up applying, went through the interview process, where I was able to meet some of the board members and eventually got accepted. Since the start of the school year, a few of my teachers have commented on how impressive it is that I'm on the school board. The last couple months has allowed me to speak on behalf of the student body and see the process of what it takes to run a district. I would like to remain on the board throughout the rest of my high school career. My post-secondary plans include going to a four-year university to become an educator, specifically a science teacher. I am planning on going to Winona State University, but I'm also keeping my options open, as we all know plans can change quite quickly. I currently have a job and plan on working my way through college to help tackle the massive student debt. I'm truly honored to have been selected onto the board and would like to remain in the position to learn more about the intricacies of the district. If anyone has any questions or comments about situations that would need student input, I would be happy to help out. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our committee reports, board committee reports. We'll start with budget development. Commissioner Harder.
Thank you. We have not met with the budget committee since our budget adoption last week. That was the focus of a lot of our work leading up to the budget adoption, but we are working to put together new meetings and move forward with new business, I think either this week or next. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move next to LEAP, Jim Schmidt.
Lead did not meet since the last meeting, but we did have a sub group meeting working on standards-based gradebook for the Arctic zone.
Thank you. Demo and trends I know we'll hear from tonight, but I'll ask Kim to ring in now.
You're right. Chair Margot Daling and I will be presenting later this evening on just seeking some direction from the board.
And Policy and Governance met October 22nd. We completed our work on Policy 343.1, the Equitable Multi-Level System of Supports, and I'll have more to say about that policy when we discuss it later tonight. We are also working on a statement of commitment to equity and dismantling the racist structures that affect our district. Our current goal with that is to finalize the statement for board consideration at our next P&G meeting and bring it to the full board for a vote as soon as possible. Additionally, we worked on updated language for our dress code policy and Rule 443.1. This work came out of school staff recommendations based around improving equity in the district. We also began discussion on drafts of coherent governance, board superintendent relations policies. We meet again on Thursday at 1 o'clock, as is our normal. Thank you. Our next report is the legislative update. Dr. Johnson.
Assembly Speaker Voss announced the newly formed Speaker's Task Force on Racial Disparities. The task force is comprised of 4 legislators and 28 community members who will focus on ways to address racial disparities, educational opportunities, public safety, and law enforcement policies and standards. The first public meeting was held on Wednesday, October 28th. Recording and minutes are available online. The Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction received a federal grant awarded to aid Wisconsin schools in expanding priority areas in student mental health. Funding from the DPI School-Based Mental Health Professionals Federal Grant Program will assist high-need school districts in recruiting and retaining pupil services staff, such as school counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists to help reduce high students to pupil services ratios, as well as increase graduate training opportunities for those interested in pursuing school-based mental health professionals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Our next agenda item is the consent agenda. Board considers approval of the consent agenda with one vote without discussion. If any board member wishes to discuss an item, it will be pulled out and voted on separately. Tonight's consent agenda includes minutes of October 19th, 2020, minutes of budget hearing and special meeting October 26th, 2020, human resources employment report, substitute pay, and override policy 225 for the 2020-2021 school year. I would hear a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Let's do a roll call vote.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder.
Yes.
We will now adjourn to committee. Several items on our agenda tonight. The first is recommendation of the Policy and Governance Committee to bring forward 343.1 for full board consideration. So in light of introducing that, I'll say that I'm very excited to bring this policy forward to you all for consideration. Over the past year, and especially since the terrible events of racial injustice this summer, one of the goals of this district has been to make substantive changes to our district to dismantle racist, inequitable structures in it. We heard from many voices of staff, students, and community members over this time demanding substantive change. 343.1, the Equitable Multi-Level System of Supports, replaces our outdated policy on instruction grouping. Educational research is conclusive that separating students into different level courses with names like honors, enriched, and basic acts to disadvantage students of color and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, among other historically underserved groups. Many people know this technique by its older name, tracking. Data within ECASD demonstrates that in this district, these courses have systematically separated students of color and other underserved groups. Research is also conclusive that detracking, that is, teaching all students together in one heterogeneous class, has no negative impact on the performance and achievement of top-level students, while providing enormous benefit for all other students. I will be working with Jim Schmidt to make some of those references available for those of you that would like to see that. That's pretty compelling. And because of this, it is clear that this practice cannot continue in our district. Our proposed policy 343.1 eliminates the vast majority of courses that separate students into different level courses and instead institutes a cluster grouping model within classes to provide enrichment. This will allow our teachers to teach rigorous, high-level curriculum to all students while continuing to provide support for students at both ends of the achievement spectrum. Students who need enrichment will receive it in class with a cluster of peers. Advanced placement courses and math acceleration will continue, but the policy and its accompanying rule provide for monitoring for these courses, specifically to ensure that access to these classes and assignment to cluster groups are equitable. We are not going to be satisfied with policy not translating into practice. This was one of our big discussion points in the policy and governance group, was how to make sure that just putting the words down on paper actually translates to more equitable practice. I think that this policy is definitely a shout it from the rooftops, as one of my board colleagues put it, move forward for equity and education in our district. And just one note on the language of the policy, as I could hear my English teachers throughout the ages shouting at me, you'll notice in the last sentence of the policy that the words separating and separate are in close succession to one another. And that actually was intentional to highlight the effects, that the negative effects that tracking have in putting different students into different areas. One researcher has called it an apartheid in education. So I look forward to our first reading tonight, and I'll open the floor to comments or questions, or we can read whenever we're ready. Commissioners there?
Yeah, I would like to know a little bit more about cluster grouping. So this is a practice that I've read about, I know very little about, but I know that it has, first of all, let me say, I fully support this. I fully support the idea of more equity within the classrooms and less grouping of children, separating of children out based on academic ability. I think it's not a good pathway, and I'm very grateful to see this work being brought forward. But the solution in here of cluster grouping is still, as I see it, a separating practice. It is still a segregatory practice that would be happening within the classroom, not outside of the classroom. And I would like to know more about what cluster grouping means, the training that would go in to staff being able to provide that differentiation within a classroom, how that cluster is actually integrated in an equitable fashion, because that to me doesn't sound quite like the heart of equity practice that I was hoping to hear.
So Jim, I wonder if you would share a bit. You've worked through it with us several times on the actual EMLSS model. And I know that you have a lot of the background on cluster grouping.
Yep, and so you use some really good terminology, Commissioner Zur, the differentiation that occurs. And one of the advantage, a couple pieces, one is the real time and the other is the lagging indicator that would result from it. The first is real time. It does allow for a teacher to be able to bring students in and out of those tasks, depending on if they are able to actually manage those. So for example, if you have a variety of different tasks that meet toward the same outcome for students, you can ensure that a student perhaps that was not identified, that is demonstrated throughout the course of the class, been able to meet that level of rigor, it allows them basically to fluidly add students into those particular tasks, while at the same time, all students are still part of the whole group. The second thing is, and this is something that was referred to, this is that lagging indicator piece that we talked about in the rule, is that to be able to monitor the outcome of that work and to be able to have indicators in place to ensure that our practices do not reinforce traditional past practices that have led to disproportionately identifying students of color into special education, and other factors that have separated students in a variety of means, as President Nordine mentioned, through basically tracking. So it's really two pieces. One is that fluidity that allows in the classroom, but the other is being able to monitor it to ensure that what you're intending is actually what's taking place.
And Commissioner,
Sorry.
as I mentioned earlier, one of our big discussion pieces was that we know that sometimes when you put a policy in place, the practice doesn't follow suit, or that there is risk potentially of things like cluster grouping or AP or of the math acceleration becoming de facto tracks and having that separating influence, as you mentioned. And so we worked hard to make sure that we had monitoring in there so that we can assess that. Are these practices actually living up to our plans? And if that is not there, then we're ready to make more adjustments to ensure that that doesn't happen. So, but it was something that we worked on over a course of several meetings to make sure that that language was in there, not only to make sure that the outcomes were positive for all of our students, but in fact that the access was there as well.
I really appreciate the work, and I am very grateful for your answer, Jim. And actually, you said a word, or at least a series of words that I translated as flexibility. And I did not, when I read this proposal, I did not get the essence of flexibility. And I think that I'm grateful for that. I think that that is going to lead to more equitable practices within the classroom, but laying the expectation of flexible grouping rather than, I don't see the flexibility in the language here, and the expectation that our staff would be implementing flexible grouping as opposed to more rigid cluster grouping. I think I would like to see that reflected in the language of the policy.
And I think it's an and. I understand what you're saying, and I think it's an and because you do want to provide that challenge to those students, but again, recognizing that how you set it up and how students actually are able to meet those challenges, that flexibility does need to be part of it. It is something we can look to address in that language. I've got some initial ideas, so but I'll leave that to President Nordine.
And I would actually look at the rule that was provided along with the actual policy language, so 3.1 rule. The paragraph there that I think is important is the next to last paragraph. It's the last long paragraph. Yeah, thank you, Maida. The district is committing to monitoring student progress on a regular basis by collecting data to improve instruction, ensure achievement for every student, and identify students at risk or in need of enrichment. Based on this review of progress, teams may modify instructional practices, time, frequency, groupings, and/or expertise of the provider to best respond to learner needs. And then there's a couple more sentences that I think we can all just read if we want to. And I think that is where the flexibility came in. We also had a lot of discussion, and I think the committee members and Jim will attest to this, around the idea of making sure, Jim has talked about it in terms of having many on-ramps and off-ramps to some of these things. We talked about it especially with the math sequencing. And this is the language on that particular monitoring as well, to make sure that some of that flexibility is there. So I think that the flexibility that you're asking for, from what I'm hearing, is there. But if we're not satisfied with the language as it is, we can certainly continue to work on it. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I don't want to be the only person talking here, so if anybody else would like to chime in, please do. So the secondary issue, and this was well, it wasn't actually secondary. It was the first thing I thought of. This type of model, this type of differentiation, this type of flexibility. What is the capacity of our staff currently How are they trained to do this type of thing? Because from what in my brain, how a flexible grouping scenario would work in a class would be a lot of probably fairly small group instruction in its form and its function, and how that is contrary in some instances how our teachers are teaching these classes. And they're going to need a support structure underneath them as they transition to something like this, if it's going to have integrity and it's going to be successful. Otherwise, we might end up with more rigid grouping, right? Teach these guys, get them going on something, and then go teach these guys, and the flexibility is not actually there because you're not monitoring this group. So I'm wondering how, and I don't even know if we write it into policy, right? What is the training process for educators? And some might be at a level here where they're able to implement this now, but some might be here. And how are we going to equitably make sure that all of our teachers can reach a level where they can do this and do this at a high level and do this successfully, so that all of our students everyone's getting an equal experience no matter what classroom they're in? If that makes sense.
So that's a great question. And actually this process began in earnest at the classroom and teacher level back in March. And actually even a little bit earlier when we started meeting with staff about looking at how the whole process of accelerations and enrichments actually took place. Even this last fall, as we were getting ready for the course book for next year, we met with department chairs as well to talk about this further, and we begun to lay the groundwork for that training that's going to take place. Obviously, right now, at the moment, our staff really are being pretty bombarded with the challenge of the instructional model, making that happen right now. But this could be a primary focus for us as we move toward the spring and preparing staff for next year. The other piece we have that's really a big advantage is we've had a major overhaul at the secondary level for both math and English language arts in terms of programs. So it'll give our staff an opportunity to settle in terms of their comfort with that over the course of this year, and then really have a deeper conversation about differentiating and supporting students of all levels going into next year. But these are already conversations we're having with teacher teams to help us devise the supports that they need, both in terms of training and ongoing support about how we structure that as the year goes on. So it's not a real quick answer in the fact that I can just tell you that the conversations began several months ago and they continue on to prepare for next fall.
So as a follow-up then, maybe Chair Dean, you could answer this for me, is what part of teacher training or preparation or does that get written into policy? I mean, is that something that we normally would write into policy or an expectation of it?
That would more likely come in something like a rule, I would suspect, if we wanted to delineate that. But we do have, professional development, requirements. So as well as I do that this is my second year on the board, and so I have limited experience working with the policy and governance committee in terms of what our standards are. But my understanding, and I think the exec team is probably actually better to answer this, is that would most likely come into rule that they would develop after the policy was in place.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. We do have a policy on professional growth that hasn't been visited for quite a while, but this is just part of the, anytime we have something like this that impacts so many classrooms, this is going to be a very large focus for us going into next year and ongoing. This isn't part of if you look at the exhibit that goes with this as well, it really talks about in that tier 1, that differentiation. Thank you. Hey, very excellent. On the universal tier 1, there's that differentiation, which is such a critical part about the unit. And tier 1 is that universals for all students. So this, while this policy specifically addresses a lot of the practices and outcomes that we want to see, we want to move away from, it also talks to the type of supports we want to move towards. And not only do we want to move towards this, we also want to, as President Nordin mentioned, we want to monitor success. And so we're having very, very rich discussions, both in how we prepare the continuous improvement of this model in helping staff reach this, and how we monitor our success in the ability to support our students in this model. So it's so this, as we look at this from a teaching and learning perspective, this really does, we're very excited about this because the policy and the rule and the exhibit all together really do give us clear marching orders to the type of work that we have to do, and give some sense of authority to the type of work that the board values, and it gives us the ability to really focus our efforts in that direction.
Commissioner Clements.
On the policy governance committee, it was integral to our conversation around this policy in particular that the purpose of the policy be clear, because we know in our hubris that not everything turns out the way is intended, and so we intended to sculpt this policy to make sure that the outcome and our purpose was relatively clear and concise, so that we could interpret, and future boards and administration could interpret the policy towards that purpose as we implement it. And we hope we get it right the first time, but we know that things bear revisiting over time to make sure that they're meeting its purpose. And I think that's the last couple sentences there. Talk about how to evaluate to make sure that we are actually the district is actually achieving the results that we're setting out to do. Because as I said, I'm not an educational pedagogy person, so I'm more about making sure that we have the purpose clearly stated and give the administration the parameters under which to implement it. And I think this policy does a good job of striking that balance and being purposeful.
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
I think also in terms of Commissioner Zer's concerns about the support for staff, I think the one would hope that as data changes, as the reliance on using data to interpret the needs of our particular students, the school district would be compelled to ensure that the professionals who have to examine the data and make the necessary changes of instruction are prepared to do so. And as Commissioner Clements talked about in our P&G, one of my primary concerns is ensuring that the deliverers of this particular Emlss policy would be able to understand that they have the understanding and the training of the data. And so I would think, and I would hope that the school district would be compelled to ensure that, along with gaining access to data and understanding that data, that the training to incorporate best practices for our students would also be in that. And so I guess in my sense, in terms of the concerns that Commissioner Zer expresses, I think it's inherent that it has to happen in order for the policy and its rules to be effective, therefore not necessarily warranting the direct implementation of services or training for staff within the policy and the rules. So that's kind of how I interpret it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So I think it comes down to an issue of data versus measuring of success and the process by which we're going to do that. So we can talk about data up and down and side to side, but the fact of the matter is we've been using data forever, and the gaps are still there, and they keep getting bigger. So how are we going to utilize measurement differently? How are we going to utilize data differently in less than a year, in a structure that is challenged right now, and also just in a constant within the guaranteed and viable curriculum with maybe we don't have those systems in place right now? So I'm kind of wondering what the measurement procedure is. What is the data? Is the data analysis going to be structured differently?
It's been interesting listening for a little bit because the discussion that you all are having is kind of a condensed version of what took place over maybe 4 or so policy and governance meetings. We shared actually at policy and governance sort of some samples of what that looks like in terms of using our data warehouse to be able to monitor student performance, and we showed a bit of a mapping tool that's color coded to really start to be able to hone in on students that need supports in different ways beyond what they get universally. And so your statement actually is predicated on the idea that we haven't already made the shift, and we have. It's been a shift that we've been making over the past several years, and we're continuing to move in that direction. And our assessment team has done a really outstanding job working with buildings to begin to shift the way that they look at student data to be able to look for trends and identify the way that we support students that we had not in the past. This policy, though, does give us the ability to turn that up even more. And really, as a whole, when we start looking at, there are some very traditional ways we look at data. And this does give us a bit of more of a license to begin to look at them in unique ways that we've already started to do. So, for example, at the beginning of the board meeting, you heard about being able to support gifted students. Well, one of the things we did is we were actually able to demonstrate through our data that our top students, the students that came in were identified for enrichment, were not growing, right? So it was a lens that kind of surprised people that as you start to look at your data, you start to think, okay, so we've created the structure that separates out students, and then be able to look at data in a different way. In this particular case, usually we tend to look at the students that have gaps that are struggling. We're actually able to show a lens through looking at the students that have been identified as enriched, that in this environment, they were not actually growing as well. And so this process of looking at our students through multiple angles, rather than just the traditional angles, has already begun. We're not there yet. I mean, there's a lot of training that has to still go in it to develop new habits of trying to disaggregate and look at different angles. But we're starting to see some movement already. And in the short amount of time where we shifted even our policies or our practices from last school year to this school year in terms of identifying students, we're already starting to see a small turn in the demographics in our programming. So I guess the answer to your question is we're going that direction. We're starting to see some progress. We know we've got a lot more to go towards. But we also have a really strong team that is very committed to this work. The number of people that worked on this policy from the administrative level is pretty significant because they're very passionate to see the outcomes that you're trying to address become a reality.
Commissioner Harder.
Well, yeah, I'd just like to say thanks for this work too. This is, I think, definitely a good direction for our district in terms of the objective. And I think, obviously, as we've heard and discussed, a lot of the trick is in exactly how it unfolds, how we manifest it. I'm especially around assessment, as we've been talking about. I'm reminded of the dimensions of learning, which I think it was Michelle Radke and some of the folks on her team worked with the LEAP committee to develop a sort of whole child measures for when is learning happening and when is it, what would we be looking for? What is evidence of it? I was very excited about this work, especially when it was adopted as part of our our district plan, but I don't know how much we've referred to it in practice. I was wondering how much it came up, if at all, during this discussion about, especially around the question of assessment.
Actually, I think it wasn't explicitly part of our work, Commissioner Harder, but it has. That practice actually got us to helped us to look at data through those different slices that we had not looked at in the past. There's a very traditional way to look at data, and then there are ways that you really start to dig in and try to think about the questions and the slices in a different way. So that foundational work did have an impact, while not explicitly part of the policy. Really started to develop some new habits for us, and that process started quite a few years ago.
Yeah, it has been a while since that happened, and I'm glad to hear that it's continued to be a touch point. Thanks for the info.
So I wonder at this time if we could perhaps do a reading of the policy, and then we can discuss what we want our next move to be. It can either come back at our next meeting for a vote, or we can send it back to policy and governance for additional work if we feel that is needed. Would anyone, you know what, I will be happy to volunteer to read, because I'm very proud of this policy and the work that we've done here. So, the school board directs the administration to establish an equitable multi-level system of supports, EMLSS, to provide equitable services, practices, and resources to every learner based upon responsiveness to instruction and intervention. The EMLSS framework includes collaboration, a guaranteed and viable curriculum, high-quality instruction, balanced assessment, and family engagement, all within a continuum of supports. The EMLSS provides varying types of supports at differing levels of intensity to responsively adjust to the needs of the whole child. Collaborative teams strategically use data and adjust the intensity and nature of support accordingly. Implementation of the equitable multi-level system of supports is designed to ensure access, opportunity, and success for all students by providing support in rigorous, heterogeneously integrated courses with cluster grouping, rather than separating students into separate courses with titles such as enriched, honors, or basic. So I'll ask what the pleasure of the board is in terms of moving this forward for vote, or would you like it sent back for additional work?
A motion to have this move forward for a vote.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I did see Commissioner Zur had unmuted and wanted to say something, so we'll use this opportunity for discussion on the motion.
The only thing I wanted to say was that I saw that Zoe's mic was off earlier, and I wanted to make sure that she had an opportunity to speak if she wanted to.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I must have missed it. I appreciate that. Zoe, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to say that this seems like a very well put together policy, and I completely agree with it. I just wanted some clarification on what that would look like for class structures at the high school level. Because, for example, in the English program, there's like English 11, Enriched English 11, and then your AP classes. So would that remove the AP classes or just the enriched, or what would, or you don't have to use English, but what would some like structure look like?
And so I'm happy to answer that. It would remove the enriched classes. So instead of enriched English 9 and English 9, there would just be English 9. It would not remove, as you mentioned, the AP classes though, or the transcripted classes. So really, something we were asked earlier, every class becomes pre-AP and every class becomes transcripted credit to really prepare students.
And I just want to once again hit on the idea that the monitoring that we've put in place is there to help ensure that things like, while we keep AP, that it doesn't become the de facto track where white students take AP courses and students of color are not guided into those things. So that monitoring is there to ensure that we don't have something else that just becomes that course. Other comments or discussion on our motion? Johnson.
Yeah, I think I would also keep in mind, because the questions came up at PAG though, is also the monitoring and quote unquote access to data and also training and support may also indicate that we are not actually collecting all the data that we need to collect. And it opens up the room, opens up the opportunity to actually seek out more, seek out data and or information. That information, I would hope, would come from our teachers who are delivering it, as the policy says, from the students who are partaking in the learning experiences, and the families that are supporting the students taking from the learning experience. And so I want to keep that in mind as well, that it is, when we talk about flexibility, it's ongoing, and hopefully this can be transformational. And I think that's the intention. Thank you.
Dr. Bika.
I'm just thinking about Zoe and also thinking about Emery and others tonight, that in the time that I've been on the school board, there have been so many high points, and tonight will be one that I will always remember. Hopefully it's the start of many changes to come, and the opportunity again for Zoe or Emery, if you have looked at the science already, or you'll go on to examine the research in this area, and just to be very proud of the opportunity to be in on this kind of data-driven decision-making and the change that this will bring for a school district. It's a point to remember.
I can think of no better way to call the question. So at this point, all in favor of moving this forward for a vote at our next meeting, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And those abstaining? All right, we will bring this back at the next meeting. We will right now schedule it as an individually considered resolution. I think this is important enough to justify it, and I'm excited to be a part of this finalization at the next meeting. The next item on our agenda is proposed employee handbook modifications, and we'll turn that over now.
Thank you, President Nordine. I'm sure this will be just as exciting for you as what the previous discussion was all about as well. So
I'm thrilled already.
I knew you would be. Employee handbook language related to emergency school closures. This handbook language is coming before you tonight due to the fact that our instructional model has obviously changed, and that makes this current handbook language invalid. So the current language that you have, or that we have in the handbook, requires specific positions to be physically reporting to work on emergency school closure days. And then the remaining positions that it doesn't specifically identify to report to work all have the ability to use professional judgment in determining whether or not to report on those days. In either case, whether those positions are reporting to work physically or not, employees are receiving pay for those days. And there are 5 days built into the calendar where this exact situation can happen before we tell employees, nope, on the 6th day, no longer use professional judgment. Now we're saying do not come to work because we need to make up whatever days happen after that 5th day. So now with staff and students having access to our virtual platforms, that allows student instruction to actually happen on those emergency school closure days, because in the old model, we weren't able to offer instructional time for students on those days. So there was no instructional time happening for students in the old model, but moving forward, we'll be able to continue to offer student instructional time based upon the technology that we have available to staff and students as we have it now. So the proposed language that you have before you indicates that the employees have an opportunity to make sure that the work continues. And so the work that needs to happen is going to continue to happen either remotely or on site. And in most cases, it's going to be determined by the employee. So for an emergency school closure day, the majority of days we're talking about are inclement weather days, or a snow day as most people refer to it. And so on those days, employees can choose to come to work if they would like, or they can choose to work from home if that's more convenient for them. But the work continues, whether you're a teacher or an aide or a secretary or an executive director or the superintendent, the work continues on those days, and we now have the means to make that happen remotely. So there are some positions that you can see identified in the language there, which previously were required to come to work on those days regardless. If you scroll up a little bit, you can see that that list of positions is kind of lengthy, and going forward, instead of requiring those positions to report to work, it's more of an determined by the supervisor as to whether or not those positions need to report. Because if there's one thing we've learned since last spring, it's that a lot of work that needs to be done in the district can actually be done remotely, and we don't actually have to be on site to get things done. So one of the things that you're going to see in the revised language is that that list of positions that used to be required to report, now it's up to the supervisor to let them know whether they need to report. Obviously, in some situations, it's a given. For example, it's a snow day, we've got a big snowstorm, buildings and grounds, it's a given, you're going to have to come in for snow removal. On the flip side, if it's a unique and unusual circumstance, say for example, it's February and there's no heat at Longfellow, that's a unique situation, and that in that case we would, supervisors would contact the people involved and say, here's what's expected of this situation. So going forward, basically it's that the work still needs to be done, and for the most part it's up to the employee to decide whether they can do it on site or remotely. For the list of people who are required to come in regardless, that's now going to be more flexible based upon the work with the supervisor. And we've been able to prove that a lot of this work can be done remotely. We don't all have to physically be in the building to done. And I think the last thing that's important to know is internally we're working on a document that indicates kind of the nitty-gritty information that employees would want to know about the expectations and requirements of their position during these emergency school closure days. So for example, for a teacher, if it is a snow day and we're going to be working remotely or on site, whatever I should choose, what exactly needs to happen? Because instruction is going to continue. So what does that look like for a third grade teacher and I guess high school biology teacher? So all of those details are being worked on internally with input from principals and teachers so that everybody's on the same page in terms of what that looks like. And that document would be an internal document, not something that would be published in the employee handbook. It would be distributed within buildings by the building principal and provided to employees at the building level. So that's the employee handbook language that you have before you. Is there any questions I can answer for anybody?
Yeah, okay, I just have a question and then a follow-up. So are you suggesting, and maybe I missed this in the initial, your introduction, are you suggesting that this language applies after the 5 days that are built into the calendar, or is this just right out of the gate, we get a snow day in November and this applies? So we no longer have snow days or any days built into the calendar that would be, off or potential time off.
Correct. There would be no days that would be off anymore because we have the potential to continue with education and instruction of students through our virtual platforms of technology that's available. So there really isn't a need to have that time off. In the past, we've had snow days because it was unsafe to get students into buildings. Buses couldn't run. that's not a barrier for us anymore. So there isn't really a reason to not provide instruction to students. So the thought was that we don't need to have that anymore. It's not a barrier to us.
Correct. So can I just ask a follow-up then to that? Because I have a slight concern that I'd love to hear your expert opinion. But so I'm a parent, and you know, if I was a classroom teacher in the district, I think if it was 6 a.m. and I got the notification that school was off and that my, you know, kids were going to be learning virtually, and I would need to be on with my students at 8:30 or whatever time it was, 7:30 if I'm in the high school, or prepare lessons and then prepare my children to be learning, and have to go outside and deal with the situation that's happening outdoors so that I can get my pets out or my car out to go help so-and-so who's stuck. So I'm concerned at what we're creating here. And of course it would be very easy for me, right? I am privileged enough. I have time. My kids have warm houses. I have help. I have neighbors who would help me. I have a snowblower. It makes it easier. I'm wondering if we're creating an unrealistic expectation, and then we have students who won't show up. Teachers, an inequitable experience based on the teacher's ability, the instructional staff's ability, depending on their home situation, the child's ability to engage because of their parents' ability to engage. Parents still have to go to work. And so I'm just concerned that we're creating an unrealistic expectation. Now, I think if we go over and above for snow days, this seems a reasonable system, but I am concerned. I'm concerned about the potential inequities that we're creating here. So maybe you can speak to that.
Sure. I think that there's probably some assumptions made in maybe what you're thinking that's going to look like, because when I hear you ask the question, what I picture in my head as you're saying those things is that third grade teacher is expected to be online with their students at 8:15 and teaching lessons while they're trying to figure out everything else that's happening. I mean, that's what I pictured as you were speaking about that, or the same thing with the biology teacher, or whatever, that they're looking at creating their virtual lessons or online learning with students that, during that inclement weather day. And I don't think that we're that far down the road in terms of what that day's instruction looks like at this point in time. For exactly what you're pointing out, that there's still some unknowns in terms of who is going to be available to create the days, what that day is going to look like, the equity for that day for both the student and the instructor. And I think that those are pieces of that internal document that I mentioned that are still being worked out.
Okay, yeah, because I guess my concern is more, they have to have something prepared for their kids on the fly. And then parents have to be prepared to have their children engaging. And if part of their educational engagement, their grading, their assessment is going to be based on their ability to engage on that day with a lesson plan that's been created in an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, that's my concern. So I fully support utilizing the technology that we have and utilizing this amazing ability that our staff have developed to reach our students in a different way. I think it's extraordinary, the opportunity that we're giving our district through the technology and the training and the professional development. I just don't want us to create such a rigorous, constant, so much rigor that it ends up harming certain children, if that makes sense. So I don't think it's an assumption as much as it's a concern that I'm trying to share.
Yep. And again, I think that they're still working through those pieces. I know that Kim and Jim are having conversations with principals and teachers. And so I know that those details haven't been finalized yet, but I saw them taking notes, and so I know that they'll include your comments in their conversations. On families, yes, as part of the Family Advisory Council.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yeah, I would like to echo some of what Commissioner Zer was saying as well. And I think that there are potential courses that are easier to deliver in an online modality than other courses. So music or some of the lab intensive courses, and to have a teacher with a lesson plan that can automatically transition to online is going to be a very difficult thing, I think, in some cases. And in addition, I think that there's a substantially different approach that you're going to have with a 17-year-old than a 7-year-old. So that parent that is not there to assist in the teaching for that 7-year-old, I can see some issues with this. Do you have any comment?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we brought together a focus group last week of teachers all the way from pre-K all the way through senior level in high school. And as Kay mentioned, they haven't finalized it yet, but their level of concern about being able to do this at their level, this is what they do. And they recognize they still have some details to work through, but they are, as long as they speak to the same things that Commissioner Zer was talking about, a little flexibility, because you never know if it's a 20-inch snowfall or if it's just freezing rain. I mean, so it kind of depends. And so they want to just work through some of that language to make sure everyone's on the same page. But there was, typically we can tell quickly by talking to a group of educators if it's going to be a big climb or not. And this just didn't seem like one that group really identified as something they could accomplish pretty quickly. I know also Kim has talked to principals too, and had some similar discussions. I don't know if you want to summarize. Yeah.
So what principals were looking at was, from a teacher's perspective, what would help them be prepared for this day. So as an example, do they have a module already in a module ready to go in Canvas to be posted in a snow day sort of module, or in Seesaw, or do they look to pull their kids together, for example, for a morning meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning versus at 8:10 when typically it would happen. So I don't think that the school day would look the same as what it looks like when kids are face to face. But they would look to reach out to keep their kids connected at some point during the day. I think the other thing that we talked about, well, I know the other thing that we talked about this school year is on any given day, we have probably 60% of the kids that are already at home learning virtually. So, our C kids, their snow days, a snow day wouldn't impact their learning. And if it happens on a Monday or a Tuesday, the kids that come to school face-to-face on Thursday or Friday, they're already virtual on Monday or Tuesday. So looking at how do we balance what happens in a weather event this year is probably a little bit unique because our kids can be in one of 3 different places on any given day.
CK, it was exciting after all.
More exciting than I thought it was going to be.
Since there are no, Dr. Bika.
Yeah, I guess I think I might have an easier time, I don't know, perhaps wrapping my mind around all the issues. Does it make sense to compartmentalize things that what does an employee handbook look like for school closures this academic year? What does it look like for academic years moving forward? That might be the same or it might be different.
Well, we had that conversation, you know, obviously this language, like all employee handbook language, went to the Employee Relations Committee, was reviewed by that group and vetted by that group. And we talked about that in that committee meeting, and the consensus of the committee was the employee handbook language really wouldn't change because, you know, in all likelihood, we're not going to unring the bell in terms of technology accessibility to staff and students. You know, when we have one-to-one devices, I mean, we don't anticipate going backwards and not having that availability and accessibility to our staff and students. So as long as we have that accessibility available to staff and students, we would anticipate that we would be able to have the same type of emergency school closure language and expectations in the handbook. What might be looking different, Lori, is the internal document that Jim and Kim and I have been referencing in terms of the details behind what an emergency school closure date may look like for staff and how we work with students in terms of the instructional day and what that might look like in a subsequent year where maybe we don't have A, B, and C at the cohorts of students. That piece may look different, but that wouldn't affect the employee handbook language. That would be internal documents where it's, you know, the details behind everything. But the handbook language that you see before you that needs board approval, that piece the Employee Relations Committee didn't see changing.
Okay, if board members were interested, would they have the ability to see that document once it was completed?
Sure. Board members always have the opportunity to see anything they like. They're board members.
Commissioner Zur?
I think that was about my question. So I'm going to unmute myself now.
Well, maybe you can leave it unmuted. I think at this point, unless there are other questions, I just, you know, normally this is the sort of thing that we would send forward and just probably put it on the consent agenda. So I just want to, again, ask what's the pleasure of the board? And I'll specifically ask you, Commissioner Zur, Dr. Bika, and Commissioner Lyons, as you were the ones asking some questions about it, you know, how you feel at this point about moving it forward. And then, of course, the rest of my colleagues are free to weigh in as well.
I think I would be more comfortable seeing the internal document about what this looks like this year versus next year, because this year we're all in this amazing space now where we wake up in the morning and we're prepared to get our kids ready for virtual learning. We understand the schedule, we understand the expectations, we understand how to engage. But next year, when we don't have that expectation, I'm more concerned. I mean, I think that what the staff do and how the staff prepare is a wonderful reference point for what it means for our community, what it means for our families, and what it means for our kids. And I want to make sure that that experience is equitable, that those kids have equity and access to that experience on that day. Because if they're expected, you know, to be in attendance, and that is part of their assessed experience in school. This year it's different. We know the expectation. We know we have to show up on virtual days. To have that expectation going forward is different for our community. And so I would love to see that internal document prior to moving this forward to the consent agenda.
Well stated. My mind jumped immediately to a non-pandemic time when I was reading this. In this year, this is not going to be an issue. I immediately jumped to how does this work at a time when we are 100% face-to-face. And I'm not necessarily interested in the details, but I do compartmentalize some of these areas and would like to see the detail tonight.
What about you, Dr. Mika?
I'm sorry.
Yes, I agree with Commissioners Zur and Lyons. Thank you.
So then it looks like we'd like to see a little bit more work and have a better contextual understanding about what this will look like for, I guess, primarily staff and students, I guess.
So President Nordin, can you help me to understand how to go about doing that? I mean, accomplishing what the board is asking for, since that isn't part of the policy. I mean, we're looking to get a policy approved so that it can be in place.
Right, and
Weather Day.
Right. To be frank, I don't necessarily agree with my colleagues. I think that in my experience as a teacher, the idea that if school is closed and I had to figure out how will I translate this thing, and I would like you to remember that I taught chemistry and physics and physical science, and all of which were heavily lab oriented. I have confidence that I would have been able, now it would have been work, and I'm not suggesting that our staff will not have to do that work. But I'm confident that I could come up with something to provide my students a learning experience on a day when snow was in the forecast and we were not in school. I'm also confident that our students have the ability to access their technology. You know, we do is, you know, that we know that probably is not always the case because we cannot control every aspect of students' access to the internet, but we've done the things that we can do in providing them devices and providing hotspots. So so I can't necessarily say that I agree that I would not have a problem putting this forward. From what I'm hearing, and I'll ask, you know, please jump in if is that Commissioners Zur, Lyons, and Bika especially are wanting to make sure that our teachers are not put in a bind by having to throw together some sort of expectation. They want to know what will the expectations be on our teachers for this sort of situation, especially in years where we might be fully face-to-face and only virtual on what would normally be snow days. And the same thing, you know, what will the expectations be for students to make sure that they are able to access that learning, that they are not falling behind, or that they are not negatively assessed if perhaps they can't be involved because they have to be digging their parents' car out for them or something like that. That's what I think I hear my colleagues asking, and please add to it, or if I'm wrong. I see Dr. Bika and Commissioner Lyons at least nodding.
I have no problem with passing this policy for this year. I just would like to see the detail of what happens after this year.
Yes, I agree with that. I would have, if this said for the 2021 school year, I would have no problem advancing it. I think it makes complete sense considering the expectations put on our staff and our students this year. I think my concern comes with what it looks like going forward.
So, Kay, what do you think about, you know, putting for the 2021 school year, and then the policy language as for a consent agenda, and then you know, making some sort of note or bringing that back forward with some of that expectation as we go into the next school year, which I think we're all at least hopeful will look different than this school year, so that we can revisit that later on as it gets closer to a different situation.
That sounds great.
Is that acceptable to the board? Okay, then we'll put that as a consent item for next time with that change to the just applying to this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Johnson, you had something to add?
Yeah, can I just make a suggestion as in the executive members are working on this internal document, and I think if you foresee this policy moving forward, that, you know, whatever those requirements as it relates to substitute teacher preparation of teachers, that I think having virtual or lesson plans that could be utilized online for multiple purposes, not only for a substitute to use, but also for a face-to-face instructor in light of emergency closure, that lesson could also be then transformed for the virtual piece. And I guess listening moving forward, I guess there's also this underlying assumption that all the steps and supports that were taken in place to make our hybrid model, our virtual model work, that moving forward, we are, financially as well as supportively as a district on the hook moving forward to make sure that all our students have those resources available to them. Thank you.
Our next item is the student transit contract. And Abby, I'm going to be frank, I hope that this is boring.
Well, we'll hope so, Tim. Oops, I shared the wrong screen. Hold on a second here. So tonight we would normally go through the student transit contract. Every year we bring it forward to the board after we've adopted the budget. So this year's a little bit different because we are recommending some changes that we wanted to talk and present tonight. We have had this conversation with budget development already, so we wanted to share that conversation with the rest of the board. So first of all, I wanted to share what our transportation costs look like last year. So you can see that we budgeted about $6.1 million for transportation last year. And then as a result of the pandemic, we paid about $4.7 million for a difference of about $1.4 million. The difference is because in our contract, if there's a clause in there that says we'll pay 18% of our daily rate for any school closures. We did not have any language in there that related to a long-term closure. That language was designed many years ago for snow days and inclement weather days where we would be closed for a day or two, or if we were closed for more than the 5 days that we talked about previously, then those days would be made up, and that's when the revenue would be recognized. And so just for future reference in our discussion tonight, if we paid 100% of the daily rate, that's about $27,554 per day. 80% is $22,043. And in the recommendation that we're going to bring forward tonight, we are looking to approve 80% of the daily rate, which is a difference of $5,511. And just in the year that we're in right now, if we looked at what that would cost us or save us, I guess you could say, the 80% versus the 100%, just on the virtual Wednesdays, it's about $176,000. One of the questions that I received when I first brought this to budget development is, what did other districts do across the state that contracts out their transportation? So I looked and did a little research, and you can see Chippewa Falls paid 100% of their transportation costs during the spring pandemic, and they have not made any changes to their contract for this year. Hudson paid 100%, but they did not pay for any fuel, and they did not change their contract for the 2021 year. Whitewater, their contract said 90%, and again, they kept that 90%. Wausau was 80%, and they reduced it down to 55%. Appleton was 72% with no change. Kenosha was at a 60% and went to 50%. And then Altoona, obviously their contract mirrors ours, and so they paid 18% just like we did. And Menominee actually had mirrored our language as well with their provider. And for the same reason, they're evaluating their contracts at this point in time as well, because they used our contract language of the 18%. The proposal includes not to change 18% for days that aren't made up due to inclement weather. That works, and that's the current language for those, short-term unanticipated closures. The recommendation would be that we would look at 80% or greater on days that routes don't run. So for example, what that means is on Wednesdays, we're currently running the private school routes because many of our private schools are in school 5 days a week. But that is less than 80% of our normal daily transportation. So in the contract, it would be spelled out that we would pay 80% or the greater of the routes that run on those given days. We also would add a piece in there about 80% of the daily revenue for long-term closures, with the addition that if there is any federal money available, that we would discuss and coordinate how could those funds be used to benefit both of us, the district and student transit. And then the other piece that we are asking to modify in the contract is flexibility if the revenue limit increase is 0% or less. So many of you may or may not have been on the board, but several years ago we actually had a revenue limit decrease. And so based upon contract language, then the amount that we paid for our busing actually decreased. And that that's very difficult to do because then you're trying to operate with less dollars, even though your costs might be going up. And so we just would like to add a clause that says we could mutually agree if the revenue limit increases 0% or less, we could look at some other factors to come up with an agreed upon amount for our daily bus rates. So I just wanted to share what the limit or what the words would be that we just talked about. So the exact words in this piece would be to remove the part that says reduce the per pupil adjustment factor, to say discontinue the revenue limit formula, or the revenue limit formula would fall below 0, then that we would work to determine an alternate rate adjustment. And then one of the things that we talked about was kind of that language, and we used to say inclement weather, but now knowing that we have virtual learning, we tried to come up with some language that would work. And so what we came up with was removing for an entire day. We'd say where virtual learning was not planned on that day and the day will not be made up because it shall be entitled to 18% of its daily revenue for each canceled date. And then we would add the language that says for partial closures, the amount will be 18% of the cost of the actual routes run for the day or whichever is greater. And then we added the section for long-term closures due to the pandemic or other natural disasters. SCEC will be paid a minimum of 80% of the daily revenue for the current school year. And then again, as I mentioned, that we would agree to revisit the terms if there's federal or state assistance readily available in the event of a long-term closure. So with that, what questions does the board have proposed changes?
Abby, I appreciate the work that you're doing here in supporting our transport partners. I would be remiss if I took any opportunity where you reference the fact that our public school dollars go to paying for private schools is an absurd travesty, and every single person listening here should demand of their legislators that public dollars do not go to private schools. That is an absurd thing that our tax dollars are paying for private education. Rant concluded. What questions do the rest of you have? I'd like to hear from either Dr. Bika, talked about this in agenda setting, or Commissioner Harder about the discussion in budget development and your thoughts on this.
Well, I can start. We did speak about this in budget development, and I think it's, obviously 18% for when we have long-term or extended closures like this for unexpected reasons, very difficult for a company to navigate through when they're on this scale. And so I think these changes help ensure that our student transit partners can, stay functional through situations like these. So I'm in favor of this this proposal. I guess I'll say one other thing, which is it's, as we looked at, it is quite in line with, we saw a variety of plans in different districts, but it's definitely, it seems from my perspective anyway, to be very much in line with the kinds of measures that we see other districts taking around us.
I would make a motion to approve the student transit contract 2020 to 2025.
We cannot do that in a committee report, but we can certainly have that. Normally this, as I think Abby mentioned, normally the contract approval would just go through the consent agenda. And unless there are any objections, and I see Commissioner Zerl gets in a second, then we would just move it ahead to, we'll just put it on the docket for next time. But thank you. Commissioner Zerl?
I was just going to second Commissioner Lyons, but considering I can't do that, that was good. That's all I wanted to do.
All right, well then we'll keep it maybe at boring, and we'll just move it ahead to the consent agenda for next time. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you very much.
Let's keep on moving here to the demo and trends update. Thank you, Kim and Margot, for hanging around a little later than originally planned.
That's going to be.
There we go. Sorry, I think that was me. Marissa, I'm looking to share my screen. Oh, I think I have the blue ball, so I think I can do that. So good evening. Tonight, Margot Daling, Chair of the Demographic Trends and Facility Planning Committee, and I are pleased to present. We'd like to share a brief update and a recommendation of the committee requesting an enrollment projection study that I alluded to earlier in the evening.
Hi, good evening, everybody. On November 5th in 2014, the first meeting of this committee, Demographic Trends and Facility Planning, took place. Over the past 6 years, the committee's purpose has held strong by providing at least annual recommendations to the board regarding trends, boundary issues, capacity updates, and other relevant data. Over the past several months, the committee focused on providing a long-term solution to providing relief to schools experiencing overcrowding. In doing so, we are committed to following the committee principles as you see listed on this slide. Tonight, the committee would like to emphasize our work specifically within 3 of the principles. The first is projected demographic data from external sources. The second is utilization of research. And the third is keeping the school's enrollment capacity between 65 and 100%. The committee has been before you several times over the past few years. As you can see, the committee has made multiple recommendations regarding boundaries to balance enrollment and prevent overcrowding across the schools. Today, we're here before you to recommend and request approval to proceed with Uw-Madison's Applied Population Laboratory School Enrollment Projection Study.
Thank you, Margot. Last school year, the committee recommended a short-term relief plan that you might recall. It involved multiple elementary schools that needed help in balancing enrollment and allowed families in 3 geographical areas to choose between Nance, Meadowview, and Robbins Elementary Schools. This was to help temporarily alleviate overcrowding. With the closure of schools last March and the current hybrid and virtual cohort models in 2021, the current enrollment numbers that you see here do not reflect the typical capacity. At this time, enrollment at each school going forward is really, to be quite frank, unknown. If the committee is approved to proceed with the student enrollment projection study, we expect to receive enough data to confidently project the 2021-22 enrollment numbers and can get ahead of the game for next year's capacity concerns. One of the things that you'll notice here on this slide is for this school year, the one school that is in red is North High School, and you will hear me speak a little bit about that when we talk open enrollment in January. So I just want to foreshadow for you at this time that even with the instructional model as it is this year, North High School continues to be a concern. Over the past decade, Uw-Madison's Applied Populations Laboratory has conducted 2 in-depth studies for the Oakland Area School District. One was in 2011, the other in 2015. Both studies gave the district valuable detail and insight into each school's demographic data and forecasted enrollment predictions backed by comprehensive research and discerning data. During this unprecedented time of the pandemic and hybrid learning, all while continuing the discussion of a referendum, the committee believes that the school enrollment projection study will be in our best interest. At the district level, a study would provide historical data, birth data, housing trends, population estimates, and migration trends. Enrollment projections from an overall view by grade would be provided through 2030-31, giving us a 10-year span of enrollment predictions. In addition, consideration would be taken to modify projections due to the ongoing health crisis. At the school level, a study would provide annual enrollment projections over the course of those 10 years, separating out each grade level for all of our 20 schools and programs, including the early learning program, charter schools, and the Eau Claire Virtual School. Multiple graphs, charts, tables, and a detailed analysis and conclusions would be provided. Taking a look at the timeline, if you vote to approve our recommendation, Applied Populations Lab in Madison could begin working on the study for the district this month or shortly after your approval, and have it completed before second semester begins in January. This would give the Demographic Trends and Facility Planning Committee enough time to review the findings and create a game plan regarding demographic trends, boundary issues, capacity issues, and other relevant data. The question on everyone's mind is probably how much would this cost? Surprisingly, the study is rather affordable for everything that it includes. The committee would be able to better plan and forecast the future for our district. The study is broken into two separate packages. At the district level, the cost is $3,000 or $3,500. We recommend adding the all-inclusive study, which would include projections for each individual school, and that would be an additional $7,000. So for $10,500 or so, we would have a comprehensive study of trends in our community. In conclusion, the committee is requesting that the board consider our recommendation for University of Wisconsin-Madison Applied Population Lab Study. And Margot and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Margot. My one question is, in the previous iterations of this study, we have had school level data, right?
Yes.
So this would be, essentially completing the study again to give us updated data.
That is correct.
I know from my time on the board, and I suspect that Commissioners Lyons and Clements on the committee, that the APL data has been invaluable in helping guide some of our decisions and the work that we're doing. I think this is money well spent personally, but I'll open it up to my board colleagues for their thoughts. Dr. Johnson.
Could someone who's familiar with the APL's work, on slide number 8, under number 2, could someone speak to who's providing or who's making the different assumptions that go into the particular model? Are these county and city specific, or are these general assumptions that that APL puts in the model for all districts? I guess my concerns are what's the uniqueness to Eau Claire, and does it get at really, it's in a lot of modeling ratios, there's general assumptions that are applied throughout. And some of those assumptions may not actually be applicable to the makeup of geographic and our community pieces. Because I guess for me, some of these variables that are included in terms of future trends, birth, migration, school transfers, I guess for me, it's actually where individuals are in terms of the the political nature of referendums, the change and or adjustments as it pertains to curriculum. So my curiosity is, do school districts have the potential opportunity to address assumptions and or modeling factors that go into the projections of APL Lab, or do they generally use their own? Thank you.
So I will try to answer a little bit of that, and then Abby worked with the Demographic Trends and Facility Planning Committee with the last rendition of the APL study, so I'll let Abby chime in as well. The different models that they do, what we have with the last studies were a couple of different progressions based on statistically what factors they were looking at the time. So I think the assumptions that they're referring to, although Abby, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the assumptions that they're referring to are dependent on the math, the statistics that they're using as far as whether it would be a regression model or a progression model, and not necessarily around curriculum and that sort of thing. Is that accurate, Abby?
I believe so. So the last study was done just before I took this position. So, but I believe you're exactly right. They usually look at the Eau Claire County data and what do they know. And the study is really very accurate for 5 years because we know birth rates and trends and things like that. And after that second 5 years, it's just a little bit harder because they're trying to, look at the history and see what really happened. And so I know that when I worked with Demo and Trends at that point, we were very close to the numbers that we projected, or we exceeded those numbers. And I think that Kim, you shared in previous presentations that same thing, that we were kind of on target, and then we moved ahead of where they thought they would be just, due to some other changes. So it's very interesting and it's fun to look at, but I think that, it's very helpful when we need to make decisions when it comes to facilities and boundary changes, because without it, we're not experts and we don't have all of that historical data and what trends there are. So that's why we rely on it so much.
It is also, I think, Dr. Johnson, one of the things that they, I think if you look at assumption, they look historically at homes in some neighborhoods where traditionally they have housed either older children or younger children, or students may be born in a neighborhood but tend not to stay there through middle school or high school. Those are some of the assumptions or trends that they look at. And that's one of the ways that they get that the school level data, their projections for individual schools. So that's probably the migration data that they were talking about.
Commissioner Lyons.
Thank you. I think that this data is really needed, and I think $3,000 is not a lot of money to spend when you consider that we're potentially putting millions of dollars into buildings. I think it reaffirms some of the decisions and really informs referendum going forward. The one line that I focused in on was in number 2 that Dr. Johnson was talking about. And it's that last line, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the consideration on modifying any projections due to the ongoing health crisis. That's a big Y or X factor.
And I don't have, so that's a direct quote from them, Commissioner Lyons, and I don't have more information on that. Although I can ask what that would look like, if you'd like me to follow up.
Yeah, if it's just about the propensity of a student to be in an online modality, then I don't need any additional information. But if they're actually going to modify the projection of population growth, I guess I'd be interested in.
Okay. I'll look into it and I'll let you know when I find out.
So, Kim, to be clear, what Demo and Trends would like to ask is for us to approve this, presumably at the next meeting.
Typically what happens is that Demo and Trends is given a charge by the school board, and then that directs our work. So the last charge that we were given, I think Margot shared here, you know, we had been given a charge to look at high school and kind of smoothing out the enrollment at high school. We've been given a charge to look at elementary school. And so we are wondering if we're recommending that the next charge be to commission a study. And if that needs to go to consent next time, then that would be what we're asking, yes.
So I'll once again say for me that I think that this is money well spent, and I fully agree with Commissioner Lyons' statement that this is, you know, $10,000 for the by school that will help us direct millions of dollars in terms of asking for referenda in new schools or expanding schools. And if we get it done quickly, you know, along the timeline that you're asking, that would allow Demo and Trends to also reconfirm their recommendations with new numbers in terms of the upcoming referendum in spring of 22 at this point. You know, to just reconfirm, yes, we do think that adding on to the schools as we recommended previously is still the right way to go. So I personally don't have any problem putting it on consent for next time, but I'd like to have it be a consensus idea for the rest of the board.
I'll make a motion to have it added to the consent agenda.
Second.
So those things we can do in the committee report. Any comment or question? Go ahead, Dr. Beacon.
Actually, for the future, I would really recommend that this become an administrative decision and not a school board decision. I understand the connection to Demo and Trends, but this is so very basic and straightforward that I want to jump ahead to that future where we're not making this, and we are not making this decision. It's if an administrator prefers it, then go forward.
I agree with that sentiment as well.
Call the question.
The question has been called. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? And abstaining. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to our final agenda item of the night, the instructional model report.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to share.
Thank you, Kim. Good evening to everyone again. As I share the instructional model update this evening, I first want to acknowledge the pain, stress, and difficulty experienced by many of our families and community during this time. Challenges of the pandemic are not unique to us. They're a reality in every school district across the country. However, I know the decisions that we make as a district have an enormous impact on our staff, students, our parents, and the community at large. We don't take these decisions lightly. As always, our goal is to protect the health, well-being, and safety of our community while providing a positive learning environment for all of our students. So first, I'd like to discuss the educational model survey that's still open to our families until tomorrow evening. I'd like to thank our Director of Assessment, Michelle Radke, for her assistance and leadership on the survey and disaggregating our preliminary results, as well as our group of 45 system leaders for their input in the survey as well. The first slide is a simple timeline of our survey. We wanted to survey strengths and areas of improvement for each of our models. We opened it last Tuesday, and as of today, there are slightly over 2,561 responses, which is 23.2% of our student body. That's in the next slide. This percentage is based on 11,000, slightly over 11,000 active students in the district. And then you can note the breakdown by cohort and level as well. Sorry about that, Kim. I didn't tell you to do that. So next, from our preliminary data on strengths, the ranking question was to rank the item in order of success for your child. And the items included class size, delivery of instruction, engagement with peers, engagement with teachers, environment, learning expectations, technology, and other. The rank was based on the mean of the rank. As you can see, there was 82% satisfaction with the student experience in the blended model with the face-to-face component. Overall, the technology satisfaction, ease of use near the bottom was 62%, and Microsoft Teams meeting ease of use was 65%. In the next slide, for areas of improvement for both blended and virtual, they included the same items ranked in order of success for their children. We will be performing a trend analysis on why people ranked items at the bottom of their list. As you can note, there was 44% satisfaction with the blended model students and 46% with the virtual instructional model students. Overall, technology satisfaction on the bottom, the Canvas Seesaw organization was at 53%, and method of communication was at 59% satisfaction. On our next slide, our next steps are as follows. Publish the completed Qualtrics report placed on our website. Internally, we created a summary report with strengths and areas of improvement, including the trend analysis from the open-ended questions. Then we could share the summary report with our system leaders and teacher leaders and maybe able to show them some data Wednesday during our weekly meeting times with both groups. After that, quickly develop and implement an action plan and success measures to focus on those areas of achievement. And then finally, to gauge success with future surveys to families and our internal assessment of the success measures. So at this time, I'd like to shift to the focus on improvement section, and Kim Kohler will introduce our next presenters.
Thank you. So our instructional model came with many changes this year, and as you know, some of those changes have been smooth and others have been a bit bumpy. So tonight, three principals would like to share with you what some of the celebrations are so far this year and what are the challenges at each level. So I'd like to welcome Colleen Miner from Lakeshore Elementary School, Tim Spootney from North Star Middle School, and Kurt Madsen from North High School. And we are going to start with Ms. Miner.
Thank you, Kim. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
All right. So for the elementary level, the successes that we've seen have been the power of collaboration within the grade level teams. And what that has been is that, for example, the Canvas modules within the grade levels at Lakeshore have been shared by the teachers. And so we have much more consistency as what is taught in each classroom. In adhering to the essential learning overviews, the teachers are ensuring that they're really honing in on just the essential learning targets for that grade level. Additionally, this also allows teachers to support each other in case someone is absent. For example, we had a teacher who was quarantined, and with that consistency among the grade level team, the teacher's teaching partner was able to teach through Teams into her partner's classroom. And so the students received high quality instruction even when one of the teachers was out in quarantine. Additionally, another success that we've seen with the power of collaboration is another grade level has taken truly a divide and conquer approach. And each teacher has been creating high quality content with an area of focus. For example, one teacher creates science, the science modules and word study video lessons. Another teacher was creating the math video lessons and accompanying work that went with it. Another teacher created the social studies videos. And another even created the writing lessons. So in essence, the students for that grade level, for cohorts A, B, and C, had multiple students that the teachers were learning from, and it also was creating consistency so that we truly were having a guaranteed and viable curriculum. So that power of collaboration has been huge. And another success that we've seen is our youngest learners understanding the use of Seesaw, which is the new learning management system for kindergarten through second grade. So our younger students who are here for 4 days a week, our first and second graders, they're interacting with Seesaw regularly so they can access learning on their virtual Wednesdays. And additionally, if we were to go virtual, our youngest students, our kindergarten students, they've already know how to access because they've been interacting with Seesaw 3 days of virtual learning. So those are some great successes that we've seen. Some challenges at the elementary level is creating high quality content and providing student feedback on the virtual days. Creating high quality content in Seesaw and Canvas just takes time. And teachers are spending countless hours after students leave and on weekends getting this content prepared. Teachers are also trying to troubleshoot technology concerns with students and families as they arise and responding to families with the many questions they have about their children's learning. Additionally, a challenge is monitoring learning for students on their virtual learning days and providing meaningful feedback to students who are virtual while they're also still simultaneously trying to teach face-to-face has proved a challenge. And finally, a last challenge that we're seeing is increasing student engagement on the virtual days. Not all of our students are attending their team's virtual check-ins or submitting work in the learning management systems, whether it's Canvas or Seesaw. And so as a staff, troubleshooting and working together to figure out what the barriers are for our students and families so that we can support, so they can be as engaged as we can support them to continue their learning even on their virtual days. So that's what we would like to share for successes and challenges at the elementary level. And now I can turn it over to Tim Scootley, who can share regarding the middle school level.
Good evening, board members and executive team. Pleasure to be with you tonight. For me, I outlined 2 successes and then 2 challenges so far this school year. From a celebration or success standpoint, student attendance and engagement has been very positive during our in-person learning days. It's nice to see kids are smiling, talking, laughing, and our teachers are reporting that students are working hard and staying on track as they adjust to longer 90-minute block classes through the day. Overall, the students seem very happy to just have an opportunity to be at school this fall. I was personally excited last Wednesday when I spoke with several teachers, and they let me know that they just feel like their students are settling in, and actually their in-person classes, their pacing is at a point where they feel like they'll be at the semester break and able to cover the same material as they did in previous years. So I'm happy to report that we're moving forward and on pace. The second success there is we've taken some steps to make Canvas a more consistent and user-friendly platform across our classrooms. A group of North Star staff met before the school year began back in August and determined that it would be a step in the right direction for our school to limit the number of possible class organization tools within the Canvas program. As a result, staff members have largely focused on organizing all their classes as modules and limited, we think this has limited the confusion for our students. Recently, we started to survey our students at the end here of quarter 1 about their use of Canvas and plan to continue streamlining our efforts. Certainly this is a celebration or a success tonight, but there's more work to be done in an effort to help our students and our family. Switching gears to our challenges, the first one is improvement is needed in our ability to engage students when they are at home. And this includes our 100% virtual students and our blended students who are taking their encore courses from home at the middle level. I'm very proud of our teachers who are delivering the remote instruction, and they have consistently displayed a tremendous commitment and dedication to our students. The challenge right now is determining why students might be struggling in a virtual class. It could be technology or perhaps just a frustration with one of the programs, or maybe they have other responsibilities that they're taking on with their family or in their home, or just they need some further support from us to meet their own particular learning style. So as we continue forward, we want to help students in their virtual classes be successful, and that'll continue to be a focus here at North Star. And then finally, to share with you this evening, the second challenge is just performing the unique logistics of the year. Annual routines were coming pretty easily, but all of a sudden, Picture Day, our PTSA meetings, Veterans Day program, school newsletter publication, our Family Fall Conference communications, completion of goal meetings with the staff that I'm having, All those things just take additional time and thought. So we appreciate our support, the support and partnership of our North Star families, and we'll continue to do our best to communicate to them with consistency and efficiency as our year continues. My pleasure to turn it over to Kurt Madison over at North.
Hello, everyone. Much like Colleen and Tim have stated, we have a lot of the similarities in our positive successes and our challenges. One of our successes that I'd like to highlight is that we have teachers who I like to call our Canvas gurus, are collaborating with each other, able to point out all the different options within Canvas that maybe we didn't know at the beginning of the year. This allows for many different aspects of Canvas to be utilized for students and teachers alike. That makes life living in the blended and virtual world a little bit easier on each other. The big thing that I take notice of with my staff also is departments coming together and identifying those essential learning outcomes, or like we would call them ELOs. The other aspect of that is it's just great to have students around. When you're able to walk down hallways and you see students and teachers interacting, many teachers have come to me or come into my office and just say, now that the dust has settled a little bit, we're able to get back to what we like and just interacting with each other and teaching. It's just been a great and positive thing. So I feel that's a big success. Going on to challenges. A big thing that we're really struggling with is, like at the high school level with curriculum, and you're getting to the credits and credit hours, and you're talking about getting to that finish line, and seeing students days a week has brought up challenges of we have 79-minute class periods. It's hard to cram everything in or try to get as much as we can, and at the same time meet the needs of individual students within that 79 minutes and come up if they've been gone or quarantined during their time away. And then when those students leave and they're not with us for 3 days, how do we get them to check in when they're not at school? That's become a problem or a challenge that we've had to kind of work through. So then when that happens, it's finding that time to connect with families and do a lot of outreach. Like Mr. Schooley said, we want to get back to the normal communication that we've all experienced up until 2020. But we also want to make sure that our communication is streamlined and meaningful so that we can outreach our families in a positive way and find new initiatives that we get a hold of every family and make sure that they're engaged in the Husky community. And that's the end of my presentation, so I don't know if I'm turning it over to Kim.
You are.
All right.
Thank you. So near the end of I think it was the last school board meeting, Dr. Johnson had asked about the capacity within each model. So I want to talk a little bit about that and then talk about what we're doing as we move forward. The capacity in each model has really been examined often, especially during the end of the last 2 months when we examine cohort change requests, either from our blended model to the virtual format or from virtual to blended. The impacts moving forward with those changes really involve staffing, scheduling, and the teacher relationships that have been developed over the past couple of months, especially at the elementary level. So when we look at those requests, what we do is we ask Michelle Radke, Director of Assessment, to pull data regarding the requests and enrollment. We examine schedules for requests at the secondary level and examine the impact on staffing and scheduling should a request be honored. We analyze elementary classroom capacity, enrollment sizes, and average class sizes. And then we come together to look to see which requests we can honor and which ones we are not able to honor. And that's really a team of people that comes together to look at that data. And once those decisions are made, we inform the administrators at the building, as well as the teachers and the families. After we pulled the most recent data, we were able to meet as a team this morning, actually, and look at the most recent round of requests. So at the elementary level, there were 26 requests this morning to go from blended to virtual instruction. 22 of those requests were able to be granted and 4 were not. There were 57 elementary requests to move from virtual to blended. So that's a change from the last 2 months where we had more people wanting to come back to school in a blended model than we did to move to the virtual model. Of the 57 students that wanted to come back to a blended model, 44 requests were granted, 3 requests were not granted, and 10 of those requests are still pending. We're doing a little bit more digging into those to see if we can make them happen. This morning we did begin reviewing secondary requests. At middle school we have 35 pending requests, and at high school we have 111. We weren't able to finalize action on those requests this morning, so we're going to continue to review those requests tomorrow and really help to inform administrators, staff, and families in the next week or so. Finally, our last review of change requests will occur around November 30th for elementary students, as that is the transition between first and second trimester. And at the secondary level, it would occur at the end of the second semester, which is near, or at the end of, of the first semester, which is near the end of January. On this slide here, you can see the capacity of each of our grade levels in each of the cohorts prior to today's review. So this is some of the data that we look at. Our 100% virtual program is near or above capacity at every grade level, as you can see here on the left-hand side. Making those requests to go to the 100% virtual program a challenge to honor. What we end up doing is looking at students that would like to move to the blended, and that then creates an opening in the virtual cohort C, as long as the courses line up for the students that we're kind of swapping out. Our blended cohorts on the right-hand side, you can see have more room as a whole. However, some classrooms or some schools might be at capacity while others have room, and that's really due to the physical distancing requirements and square footage. And so with that information, I'd really like to talk about looking ahead to second semester and the rest of this 2020-2021 school year. Over the past several weeks, principals at all levels have identified improvements, which you heard today from Ms. Miner, Mr. Scootley, and Mr. Madsen. They really worked to identify those improvements that could make a big difference for students. I'd like to share with you some of the work that the principals plan to undertake over the next 6 to 8 weeks. In looking at improvements, principals have identified a few broad categories. The first is student scheduling. When looking at student schedules, principals would like to capitalize on the face-to-face opportunities by scheduling fewer study halls second semester and looking to see if we can have more electives or encore classes in place of those study halls. They'd also like to eliminate conflicts in virtual schedules that would allow for more balance in our synchronous versus asynchronous learning. And we're looking to hire virtual classroom assistants, and we're speaking with local universities to see if our interns are possible in order to offer additional time for student check-in support. The second area for improvement was to build a shared understanding about virtual programming. For example, we'd like to define that targeted balance between asynchronous and synchronous learning, and we'd like to help stakeholders understand the value and purpose of each. And when I say stakeholders, that includes staff and students and families. We plan to revisit our attendance guidelines just to be more readily able to identify students who aren't engaging. I think you heard Ms. Miner talk a little bit about that. so that supports and interventions can be provided early. We know the earlier that we intervene or we address a concern, the more success students will have. And then earlier tonight, you heard each of the principals discuss building consistency with our learning management systems, that is Canvas and Seesaw. And you can see here some of the action steps that principals have identified to be able to do that. Principals identified these as important steps moving forward and have already begun the work to build this sort of consistency among courses. And then finally, as you can imagine, this year, I frequently call it the first year of teaching experience for all educators. And if you are a teacher, you know what the first year of teaching means. Staff are working longer hours than they have worked in years for many people. They're developing skills that may not have even been on their radar 8 months ago. And moving forward, principals really recognize the need to support staff through the changes that we have in our instructional model. And so to do this, they really want to spend time assessing where staff are at, providing professional development and collaboration with staff, and then help staff to apply the new learning and the new skills so that experiences for students will continue to improve. And I'd like to thank Ms. Miner, Mr. Scootney, and Mr. Madison for their help tonight. And I would like then to turn it over for board member discussion and questions.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Superintendent Johnson, and of course our three principals. It's always great to hear from building staff in these reports. Comments and questions from the board? Dr. Johnson.
Thank you for providing the information, especially on my request. I would also just like to just make another request somewhere, whether it be on presentation slide 17 moving forward, and or presentation slide moving forward on 18. Could we also include somewhere in there, I'm just addressing the mental health components, stress-related components, not only for staff but especially for our students. I think when we look at existing research as it relates to some of the disconnectedness that we're experiencing, especially in our adolescents, in the virtual environment, a lot of that is has to do with stress and some mental health, that lack of disconnectedness piece. But then also, as the various principals commented, the amount of effort and energy from our teachers that are going in also can lead to levels of stress and health. So if we could have, whether it be in the PDs and moving forward, really a commitment to addressing some of those concerns as it relates to mental health for both our staff as well as our students, that would be a welcome addition if it's not already in there somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. I was looking at Jim and Kay. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, for both of you, that we do have some resources available to staff for mental health, taking care of themselves. Is that Cheyenne? Cheyenne, is that you?
No.
No, you can just pick it up.
Sorry, I'm still in the old team. Yep, so with regards to staff, we did reach out to our provider EAP, and we do have some things online for staff to use when they are in quarantine situations. With regards to being in the classroom, again, we provided some information at the beginning of the school year regarding the 6 first weeks of class, with lots of resources and information that staff can certainly have to use, not only with their students, but also for themselves as well. with regards to the SEL mental health world.
So maybe Commissioner Johnson, what I'm hearing also is to work to make sure that staff are aware that those resources exist and to work with principals so that they can also share that information with staff.
Yes, I really think it's very important. I think moving forward and realizing that the extensiveness of continuation of potentially the current form that we're in, just to adequately get by that individuals find some level of as in the Johnson household, some level of sanity to continue to make it through. So I would just incorporate that, because I think from some of the emails that I receive, especially from staff, it's there's still this some sense that from a building and or administrative standpoint that support and or understanding not there all the time. And so I think making additional efforts that services and are provided, and that you are aware that these are difficult times. I think it goes a long way for morale, and for all of us that are practitioners and practicing in these particular times, morale is it's really at some point in time that's all you have. And so as much as we can do to improve and build upon that, I think is very important. Thank you.
Commissioner Zerr.
I just want to speak to the extracurricular activities, and specifically, the question comes from a conversation I was having with a district staff member. Pretty, off the cuff. How are you doing? I saw in the employment report that you're taking an overload. Tell me how life is going. And shockingly, the workload was not the complaint. The workload was the workload. But this individual said to me that his primary concern was mixing of the cohorts in after school activities. And I think the concern, and at the time it was not articulated very well, but I've had a lot of time to percolate on it. And the thing that I'm stuck on is if we are allowing students to if we have established in our academic world this steadfast approach that we are going to maintain social distancing, we're going to keep our cohorts so that we can keep everybody separate and safe, and contact tracing becomes easier, and we're doing a heck of a job. The staff are not, the fact that this individual did not complain about the overload or the workload, and the first concern was everything is for naught if the cohorts are crossing in a non, and social distancing is being perhaps not guaranteed all the time because it's athletics. And the question I'm stuck on in my brain is, with everything that's happening in our community, if we are going to stretch our model to accommodate after school activities, and that's going to be the first stretch. I'm wondering why that is the first stretch of our model and not trying to get kids in the building more, given the data that's presented here from the survey. Why would that be the first place that we go, and not let's get our elementary kids in school more, or let's get our 4 days a week or something, so I just would love some clarification there.
Well, I could start out briefly. I think first and foremost, the activities, whether it's athletics or show choir or forensics in mixing cohorts, is it's a time situation, because we've got winter sports approaching, and We've had meetings with families, representatives from those activities as well. So part of it's timing. The other part to that, or the other component to that while that was first, we have been discussing the ability to try to get students into classrooms for more face-to-face opportunities. And I could, I could talk about a meeting on Friday that I had about that. I could talk about meetings that I've been in with principals over the past couple weeks. I think that's where I'd like to hand off to Kim a little bit, Commissioners, where she could articulate a little bit more with those conversations.
So as I've been meeting with principals at each level, that has been one of the things that we've been exploring. So as an example, at elementary, and as we look to second semester, do we look to add a grade level? And is there room in every school to add another grade level that could come 4 days a week, or a couple of grade levels that could come 4 days a week? So these are preliminary discussions right now. And they have implications beyond, beyond the people that are in the room at the time of the discussion. So as an example, when we talk about adding a grade level at elementary, just as one example, we need to look for space for that group, and we need to look for staffing for teachers that are available. So those are the sorts of things that we're problem solving and looking at. We've also looked at or brainstormed what would happen if we went Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 1 week, Thursday, Friday, and then the next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And what would that mean, not only for buildings and grounds with sanitizing, but for the teaching and learning department and the professional development that happens, and for teachers with the collaboration that happens on Wednesdays. So those are all very preliminary, and I think Superintendent Johnson said it well when we talk about the timing of winter athletics and activities, as well as probably the complexity of some of the other schedule changes that we have, brainstormed is probably the best way to put that.
And I'd like to add a little bit more, Commissioner Zur, about Kim Kohler has said this before, where we know that our students are mixing in their cohorts outside school. And we know that they're doing that socially. We knew that they're doing that maybe through music, maybe with athletics and other types of events. But I'm very proud, and I know Dr. Nordine had spoken about this a little bit before, we're very proud of in this controlled situation that we've got with our A and B cohorts, where we're keeping our distancing, we're keeping our masks. We know that students are interacting with others over the weekends and on their non-cohort days, but the spread has been minimal in our schools, according to the health department and with our contact tracing. So that's just another thing I'd like to articulate. I know Kim Kohler has mentioned that before, whether it's here in this here in our board forum, or whether it's in different public meetings or with our system leaders as well.
I think the other thing, if I can just add one more thing, I know that you heard from the principals that engagement is, one of the areas that they'd really like to improve moving forward. There is significant research that indicates that when children are engaged outside of the classroom, their ability to engage in academics increases. So we know that students that are engaged in one or more curricular or extracurricular activities will have, in general, a higher grade point average and fewer behavioral concerns during the school day. There's new research out as well that came from University of Wisconsin-Madison maybe a week or two ago that indicated they are not finding in Wisconsin that sports is, athletics are the cause of transmission. that as Superintendent Johnson said, the contacts are coming outside for the most part of school settings.
I think we have I guess my concern with the athletic, I completely hear the benefit of an extracurricular of activities for children. I mean, I know that's a huge indicator of success, and I am a very big fan of them. My concern is that when I look at neighboring districts and I look at the quarantined groups, even within Eau Claire, right? Even within our own boundaries, where are these things starting and where are the groups that are quarantined out? It's athletics. It's every place around us, Aliva, Altoona, Regis, we've got quarantined athletic groups, and the exposure that those kids are having on their families, it causes potentially just that cascade of quarantine, not necessarily infection, but quarantine that then pushes us over the threshold that we potentially have to close down because of just people in quarantine, not necessarily infection, but quarantine. And if my point, and it doesn't have to be answered, I don't think, as much as my point that I want to make is, if we're going to push our model, I'm not entirely convinced that I want to see it pushed that if I had to make a priority list, that I would make activities the priority there. If I want a whole bunch of kids out on quarantine, I want them out because they came into a classroom for an extra day and they had an extra time with their staff. So, that's kind of I guess it's just a hurdle that I'm having a hard time getting over. So I look forward to hearing how it goes and seeing the work that gets done. That's just my question point.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, I'll once again reiterate our thanks for the update tonight. We always appreciate hearing how things are going and the steps that the district is taking to continually improve our offerings. At this time, I'll ask for any requests for future agenda items. Commissioner Zerb?
As I've been talking profusely tonight, and I apologize for that, the policy that Jim, that you cited earlier regarding staff professional development or training or something along those lines as it related to the equity work, is it possible? I guess I just don't know my role yet in this regard. Is it possible for me to ask P&G to review that in relation, like just to review it and look at it in relation to, like, with that equity lens of, like, with this new movement that we're making here, exciting stuff, but stuff that I feel like is going to need additional kind of support structures around it? Can that somehow get added to that list of additional rules or policies that we're going to need to review in relation to that?
Yeah, that's not a problem, Commissioners. Or we can put that on our workflow, and I can't promise you right now exactly what date we'll get to it. We certainly have a lot on our plate, but we can put it in the flow, and it will come up at some point. Thank you. Other requests? Excellent. We do have a work session for coherent governance planned for next time, so that will be on the agenda, and we'll, I'm certain, have some regular business, just annual things. So at this point, I would hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.